The Hinge date trap, a night of suspicion and survival. In the dead of night at her house, my blood ran cold as a hooded figure banged on the door, the sound echoing through the walls, while I stood frozen, realizing my Hinge date might be a trap, a setup for a robbery or something far more sinister that I barely escaped with my life. Her gasp had drawn my eyes to the window moments before, where I saw him, a man in a hoodie staring through the glass before he bolted, his footsteps pounding on the back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran to make sure that her doors were locked, and of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging. The relentless thuds, a heartbeat of danger as I turned to her, demanding answers, only to hear her say, "He does this and just goes away." I was a 32-year-old Navy vet, fresh from a date that had seemed perfect. Drinks, laughter, a beautiful woman. But now, in her unlocked house with a bowl of cold cereal and a supposed ex on the prowl, I faced a nightmare I couldn't have predicted. One that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about her. My name is Ethan, and this terrifying night began in a city nestled in the Mountain Time Zone, where I was using my GI Bill to attend college while juggling a demanding job. At 32, my schedule left little room for socializing, so I turned to dating apps like Hinge to meet people. I matched with a woman named Clara, a stunning brunette around my age whose profile hinted at a vibrant personality that matched her radiant smile. I'm a 32-year-old guy currently using my GI Bill to go to college in a city in one of the Mountain Time Zone states. I'm so busy with school and work, so I don't have time to go out and socialize often, which made Clara's messages a welcome distraction. We hit it off over chat, her wit and warmth shining through, and scheduled a date at a bar restaurant equidistant for both of us, a convenient spot that promised an easy evening. I arrived with a mix of nerves and excitement, but when I saw her, those nerves melted away. She was even more beautiful in person, her dark hair framing a face that lit up when she smiled, her laugh a melody that put me at ease. Our conversation flowed effortlessly as we sipped drinks. She told me she worked in a non-op role at the police station, essentially a receptionist, a job that gave her a front row seat to the city's chaos. She mentioned a roommate who was out of town for the holidays, adding that she hated being alone because of a crazy ex-boyfriend who'd stalked her. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. I was a little uneasy at that and told her as much, my stomach tightening at the thought, but she brushed it off, assuring me he was harmless. I let it go, not wanting to ruin the vibe, and we continued talking, our drinks loosening our tongues, the bar's warm lights casting a cozy glow over the evening. After about an hour, Clara suggested we go back to her place, her tone playful, her eyes inviting. I wasn't about to argue, she was gorgeous, and the night felt electric, a rare connection I didn't want to let slip away. The suggestion to go back to Clara's place felt like the perfect end to our date, but as we drove, small details began to gnaw at me, hinting at a danger I couldn't yet name, a puzzle that would soon unravel into terror. Clara insisted on driving despite my protests. I'd only had 2 gin and tonics and felt fine, but she was adamant, citing her job at the police station and the DUIs she'd seen. She then insisted on driving. I told her I was fine, and she said no, that I'd been drinking, and she saw too many DUI at her job, her tone firm, almost forceful, which struck me as odd but not alarming enough to argue further. I relented, climbing into her car, the bar fading into the distance as we headed to her place, the city lights blurring past us. The drive was short, but when we arrived, my unease grew. She walked up to her front door and simply opened it. No key, no lock, just a casual push as if she'd left it unsecured. She walked up and just opened the door. She didn't unlock it. It was already open, which I found very odd because she said that she had a stalker, her earlier words about a dangerous ex echoing in my mind, a red flag I couldn't ignore. Inside, the house was dimly lit, the air heavy with a stillness that felt wrong for a place she supposedly lived alone in, especially with her roommate away. Clara moved to the kitchen, feeding her cat with a nonchalance that clashed with the open door, her actions too calm for someone who'd claimed to fear a stalker. As she busied herself, I noticed a bowl of cereal on the counter, the milk still, cold, the cereal unsoggy as if someone had just eaten it. I touched it, frowning, and asked whose it was. She hesitated, her eyes flickering before saying she'd eaten it as a snack before heading to the bar. I saw the bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either, and I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated and said she ate it as a snack before heading to the bar. Her explanation flimsy, the timeline not adding up. She'd been with me for hours, and this cereal looked untouched, fresh, a sign someone else had been here recently. I opened my mouth to press her, but she cut me off, kissing me suddenly, her arms wrapping around me seductively, whispering, "Take me to my room." Her voice a distraction that silenced my questions, her beauty pulling me back into the moment. We stumbled to her bedroom, the heat of the moment overtaking my doubts, her touch a temporary balm to the unease that lingered. But as we fell onto her bed, I reached to close the curtains, wanting privacy, only for her to stop me, her voice firm. "Leave them open." I frowned, the request odd, but I complied, too caught up in her to argue. We continued, the room dimly, lit by the streetlights outside, her body warm against mine until a few minutes later, maybe 5, she let out a huge, scared gasp, her eyes darting to the window behind me. I turned, my heart lurching as I saw him. A man in a hoodie staring through the glass, his face obscured, before he bolted, his footsteps pounding on the back deck as he fled into the night. The reality of her harmless ex crashed over. Me, the open door, the cereal, the curtains, a puzzle snapping into place, a setup I hadn't seen coming, a danger I was now trapped in. The banging on the door jolted me into action, my instincts kicking in as I faced the reality of Clara's deception. A night that spiraled from romance to survival, forcing me to confront the danger head-on. I leapt from the bed, adrenaline surging, and ran to secure the house, my Navy training taking over as I checked the doors, my heart sinking when I confirmed the front door was still unlocked, just as I'd feared. I immediately jumped up and ran to make sure that her doors were locked, and of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging, the relentless thuds, a heartbeat of danger that confirmed my worst fears. I turned to Clara, my voice sharp with panic. "You know this is your ex, you're not worried?" She nodded, her calm demeanor chilling, saying, "Yeah, he does this and just goes away." Her words a stark contrast to the terror, gripping me. She told me that he does this and just goes away, and I asked her, "You know this is your ex?" and she said, "Yeah." And to not worry about it. Her nonchalance infuriating, her insistence that I return to bed absurd as the banging moved to the side of the house, a relentless assault that screamed danger. I screamed back at her, "Are you insane?" My voice cracking with fear and anger, the pieces falling into place. The open door, the fresh cereal, her lack of concern, all pointing to a setup I couldn't fully grasp, but knew was deadly. I didn't want to call the cops, a decision born of paranoia. She worked at the police station, and for all I knew, this man might be a cop, or she'd know the officers who'd respond, twisting the story in her favor. I didn't want to call the cops because for all I knew, this dude might be a cop, and she'd know the cops that show up and would take her side. My mind racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I couldn't just leave either. My car was still at the bar, leaving me stranded in this house of horrors, a prisoner of my own poor judgment. I confronted her, my voice rising as I pointed out the inconsistencies. Why was the door unlocked? If she feared a stalker. Who ate the cereal if her roommate was gone? "You're a liar," I accused, my fear turning to fury as she fumbled for answers, her excuses nonsensical, her calm demeanor a mask for something sinister. I started calling her out for the door not being locked, the cereal, and I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with any logical answers, her silence damning, her inability to explain fueling my suspicion that this was no simple date gone wrong. This was a robbery, a fetishized game, or something far darker. My fight-or-flight instinct surged, and I warned her, my voice steady despite the terror. "If this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise I'll kill you both." I wasn't a hard ass, but 9 years in the Navy had taught me to survive, and I needed her to know I wouldn't go down without a fight. My thoughts a chaotic swirl of what might happen next. I ordered an Uber on my phone, keeping her talking, to stay in the room arguing and questioning. My eyes on the door, ready to bolt. I stayed dressed. Luckily, I'd never taken off my pants and my jacket and shoes were by the door. A small mercy in a night of escalating dread. The Uber arrived, and without a word, I opened the door and ran, sprinting to the car as fast as I could, looking back to see Clara standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable, a haunting image that seared into my memory as I escaped. The escape from Clara's house left me shaken, my mind reeling from the night's events, a mix of relief and suspicion that drove me to take action, though the mystery of what I'd escaped remained a haunting enigma. I climbed into the Uber, my heart still pounding, the driver's casual greeting a stark contrast to the terror I'd just fled. As we drove back to the bar, I reported Clara's account on Hinge, my fingers trembling as I typed, a futile attempt to warn others of the danger I'd encountered. I reported her account on the Uber ride back to the bar, and I told the bartender as well if they ever saw her warn the next guy, a small act of defiance against the nightmare I'd endured. I reached the bar, thanked the driver, and found my car. The familiar sight of it a lifeline in the chaos, though my hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, driving home with the weight of the night pressing down on me. It had only been a little over a month since that night, but the questions lingered, a puzzle I couldn't solve, a story that didn't add up. I didn't believe Clara's tale of a crazy ex anymore. The open door, the cereal, her calm demeanor in the face of danger. It all pointed to something more sinister, a setup I'd narrowly escaped. It's only been a little over a month at this point, but I honestly have no idea what in God's name I got myself into, and I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex based off of the factors I told you, my mind racing with possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Was it a robbery, her ex a partner in crime waiting to strike? Or was it a fetishized game, a twisted fantasy she'd orchestrated for some sick thrill? I couldn't be sure, but the thought of either made my blood run cold, a reminder of how close I'd come to something I might not have survived. I was furious with myself for letting it happen, for ignoring the red flags, the insistence on driving, the unlocked door, the cereal, each a warning I'd dismissed in the heat of the moment. I'm very mad at myself for letting happen. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet and allowed myself to get into a situation like that. My training, my experience, all useless against the allure of a beautiful woman, a lesson I'd never forget. I replayed the night in my mind, dissecting every moment, every word, searching for clues I'd missed, for answers that remained out of reach. The bartender's nod when I warned him, the hope that he'd spread the word, was a small comfort, but it didn't erase the fear, the knowledge that Clara was still out there, a predator in disguise waiting for her next victim. The drive home was a blur, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a hooded figure following. Me, the echo of those bangs on the door, a sound I couldn't shake. I parked, locked my car and hurried inside, double-checking my own locks, the safety of my apartment a fragile shield against the night's terror. I sat on my couch, the same one where I'd received Clara's message, and stared at my phone. The Hinge app now a symbol of danger, a reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything. The aftermath of that Hinge date left me a changed man. The mystery of Clara's intentions, a haunting shadow that lingered, a lesson in trust and survival that reshaped my life in ways I never expected. A month later, I still couldn't shake the fear, the what-ifs that plagued my nights. What if I hadn't ordered that Uber? What if I'd stayed, confronted the man, or called the cops? The possibilities were endless, each one a nightmare I couldn't escape. A story I couldn't fully tell because I didn't fully understand it. I deleted Hinge, the app a gateway to danger I couldn't risk again. My trust in online dating shattered by Clara's deception. I avoided bars for weeks. The thought of another date, another stranger, sending a chill down my spine, my once casual approach to meeting people replaced by a vigilance that bordered on paranoia. I confided in a close friend, a fellow vet who understood the instincts that had kicked in that night, but even he couldn't offer answers, only a grim nod and a warning to stay safe. I researched Clara's name, scouring the internet for any trace of her, but found nothing, no social media, no record of her at the police station, her existence as ghostly as the man in the hoodie. The lack of closure gnawed at me, a puzzle. With missing pieces, a story that ended in survival but left me with more questions than answers. I wondered about the man. Was he really her ex or a partner in crime, there banging a performance to scare me into submission? The cereal, the open door, her calm, they all pointed to a plan, a trap I'd stumbled into, a danger I'd narrowly escaped. My life changed in subtle ways. I installed a dash cam in my car, kept pepper spray in my pocket, and avoided late-night outings. The city streets now a potential threat I couldn't ignore. I shared my story anonymously online, hoping for insight, for others who'd encountered Clara, but the responses were mixed. Some believed me, others called it fiction, a cautionary tale too wild to be true. I didn't care. I needed to speak it, to release the weight, to warn others of the dangers lurking behind a pretty smile, a charming laugh, a date that seemed too good to be true. I think about that night often, the moment I ran to the Uber, Clara's silhouette in the doorway, the relief of survival warring with the fear of what might have been. I'm grateful I made it out, grateful my training kicked in, but I'll never be the same. The trust I once had, the ease with which I met people, is gone, replaced by a wariness I can't shake, a lesson in survival I'll carry forever. Clara, whoever she was, left a mark, a shadow that lingers in every new connection, a reminder that danger can hide behind the most beautiful facade, and that sometimes the only way to survive is to run. The birthday guest, a brush with a killer. Almost a year after a seemingly innocent family gathering at my aunt's house, my blood ran cold as I read the news. Chad, the odd guest I'd sat across from at her birthday party, had been convicted of attempted murder, a brutal attack on a 17-year-old girl that happened just weeks before I met him, a chilling realization that I'd shared a table with a monster. The article detailed his vicious assault, slashing her throat, stabbing her side, leaving her for dead, a premeditated act fueled by a twisted belief she was corrupt, a crime he'd committed before smiling at me over cake. It wasn't until a few months ago, though, almost a year after meeting him, that I learned something extremely disturbing about Chad that made my blood run cold, told to me by my aunt, as well as a news article. I found that Chad was currently serving a prison sentence for attempted murder of a 17-year-old girl, a revelation that turned a casual memory into a nightmare. My stomach churning as I recalled his unsettling presence, his eager grin when talk of confrontation arose. I'm a 27-year-old artist, always in tune with my surroundings, but that day I'd missed the signs of a killer sitting just feet away, a brush with danger that still haunts me. The gathering was a small family affair last summer, a birthday celebration for my Aunt Clara at her home in a quiet community 2 hours from my city. Aunt Clara, a nurse who worked rotations at the local hospital, had invited us, me, my mum, my brother, and a few others, to enjoy dinner and cake during her rare days off. She'd also extended an invitation to a co-worker, Kate, and her son, Chad, who'd become close friends while working together, making the drive to join us. My aunt is a nurse and works rotation at a hospital in the small community about 2 hours away, and during her few days off back at home, she invited family over for dinner and cake to celebrate and spend time together. A simple event meant to bring us together, a moment of warmth I'd looked forward to after a hectic week of drawing commissions and deadlines. We were introduced to Kate and Chad when they arrived, and I'll admit, I felt an immediate discomfort, a heaviness in the air that I couldn't shake, a trait I've always had, sensing shifts in energy when people enter a room. We were introduced to Kate and Chad when they arrived, and I know this will sound cliché, and that everyone whose story starts similar to this will say next, I immediately got a bad feeling. But for me, it was just a heavy discomfort, a gut feeling. I've learned to trust, though I tried to push it aside, chalking it up to my neurodivergent sensitivity. Kate was warm, sticking close to the kitchen to help Aunt Clara with the food, her laughter a comforting backdrop to the evening. Chad, however, veered off to the back deck, where my mum, brother, Uncle Dan, and my uncle's sister Tammy were sitting, and I joined them. curious about this new guest but wary of the unease he brought with him. The deck was a cozy spot, the summer air warm, the fairy lights Aunt Clara had strung up, casting a soft glow over our gathering, a scene that should have been idyllic but felt tainted by Chad's presence. Tammy, a talker who loved sharing every detail of her life, dominated the conversation with tales of her tumultuous romantic escapades, her latest involving a married man she planned to confront. Chad listened intently, his energy shifting in a way that set me on edge, a subtle change I couldn't ignore as the evening unfolded. Chad's presence on the back deck grew increasingly unsettling as the evening wore on, his self-obsessed demeanor and eager interjections hinting at a darkness I couldn't yet name, a discomfort that lingered long after the party ended. He inserted himself into the conversation with a neediness that felt off, always steering the topic back to himself, craving attention like a performer on a stage. Chad would interject and fit himself in finding any area to talk about himself. He wanted us to ask more about him, and I got the sense that he was a little self-obsessed and enjoyed being the center speaker, his voice loud, his grin too wide, his eyes darting between us as if gauging our reactions. I sat quietly observing, my artist's eye picking up on the way his energy clashed with the warmth of the gathering, a discord that made my skin prickle despite the summer heat. Tammy's stories, as always, were the centerpiece of the evening, her animated recounting of her latest love affair, a married man who promised to leave his wife, filling the air with her dramatic flair. My mum, who enjoyed Tammy's company, chimed in with friendly chatter, their shared interests in gardening and recipes a light contrast to Tammy's heavier tales. But when Tammy mentioned wanting to confront the man at his home, Chad lit up, his grin widening, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "What's his address? I can show up for you," he asked, his tone too eager, too genuine to be a joke. "What's his address? I can show up for you," he asked, while anyone would think this is kind of a harmless joke, something in the way he looked. Genuine unsettled me, the words hanging in the air like a threat. Though Tammy laughed it off, assuming he was kidding, the rest of us following her lead. The moment brushed aside as the evening continued. The rest of the party went smoothly on the surface. Kate and Aunt Clara brought out a homemade chocolate cake, the candles flickering as we sang "Happy Birthday," the laughter and chatter a veneer of normalcy that masked my growing unease. Chad's behavior didn't escalate further, but his presence lingered like a shadow, his odd energy a constant undercurrent to the night's warmth. I watched him from the corner of my eye, noting the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he seemed to thrive on attention, a self-absorption that felt performative, almost predatory. When the party ended, I left with my mom and brother, the drive home quiet as we processed the evening, my mom admitting she'd felt the same discomfort I had, though neither of us could pinpoint why. We talked about Chad in the days that followed, dissecting his behavior, trying to make sense of the unease he'd sparked. "He's just weird," my mom said, her voice tinged with a worry she couldn't quite shake, mirroring my own thoughts. We chalked it up to a personality clash, a quirk of our sensitivity, and moved on, the memory of the party fading into the background of our busy lives. I returned to my art, losing myself in sketches and commissions, the summer stretching into fall, the incident at Aunt Clara's becoming a footnote, until a conversation with my aunt months later brought it roaring back, a revelation that turned a casual memory into a chilling brush with danger. The revelation about Chad's true nature hit like a thunderbolt, transforming a forgotten discomfort into a horrifying realization that I'd sat across from a killer, a moment that reshaped my understanding of the danger I'd unknowingly faced. It was nearly a year after the party, in the spring of the following year, when Aunt Clara called me, her voice heavy with a mix of shock and guilt, to share the news that turned my stomach. Chad had been convicted of attempted murder, sentenced to 3 years in prison for a brutal attack on a 17-year-old girl, a crime that had happened just weeks before he sat on that deck with us, smiling over cake. It wasn't until a few months ago, though almost a year after meeting him, that I learned something extremely disturbing about Chad that made my blood run cold, told to me by my aunt. As well as a news article, I found that Chad was currently serving a prison sentence for attempted murder of a 17-year-old girl. The words a punch to the gut, my mind racing back to that summer evening, to the unease I'd felt, the gut feeling I'd dismissed as overreaction. The details were horrifying. Chad had walked the girl home, then turned violent, slashing her throat and stabbing her in the side, causing a 6 centimeter laceration to her liver and a 4 centimeter wound to her diaphragm, leaving her for dead in a premeditated attack fueled by a twisted belief she was corrupt. He slashed her throat, stabbed her in her side, which caused her to have a 6 centimeter laceration to her liver and a 4 centimeter wound to her diaphragm. He then left her for dead, the brutality of his actions a stark contrast to the man who'd laughed at Tammy's stories, who'd offered to show up for her, his words now echoing with a sinister intent I hadn't recognized at the time. She survived, testifying against him, her courage leading to his conviction. Though the judge noted his lack of remorse, his refusal to take responsibility, a chilling detail that made my skin crawl. I dug deeper, finding the news article Aunt Clara mentioned, each word painting a picture of a monster I'd shared a table with, a man who'd hidden his darkness behind a grin, a man who'd already committed this heinous act before sitting across from me, his hands clean, but his soul stained with blood. The timeline was what hit hardest. He'd attacked the girl weeks before the party, meaning I'd sat across from someone who'd tried to take a life, who'd planned it, who'd texted a friend about his vile intentions, claiming she needed to be put down. It was premeditated, and evidence showed texts that he made to a friend of his plans weeks prior. He claimed in those texts that she was corrupt and needed to be put down. The words a window into a mind so twisted I couldn't comprehend it. A mind I'd been in the presence of, oblivious to the danger. My mind replayed the party, the way Chad had lit up at Tammy's story, his eagerness to confront her lover, the way he'd watched us, his energy a heavy weight I couldn't shake. I'd sensed something, a discomfort I couldn't name, but I'd dismissed it, assuming I was overreacting, a quirk of my neurodivergent sensitivity. Now, I realized that feeling had been a warning, a primal instinct that had seen what my eyes couldn't, a truth that left me trembling as I sat in my studio, my sketch pad untouched, my thoughts consumed by the what-ifs that haunted me. The chilling truth about Chad's crime forced me to confront the reality of the danger I'd unknowingly faced, a brush with a killer that left me questioning my instincts, my safety, and the fragility of the world I thought I knew. I shared the news with my mom, her face paling as she recalled the same discomfort she'd felt, the way Chad's presence had unsettled her, a mother's intuition that had mirrored my own. We sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on us, the memory of that summer evening now a dark stain on our family's history. "We were so close to him," she whispered, her voice trembling, the realization that we'd shared space with a monster, a man who'd slashed a girl's throat, who'd left her for dead, making the air feel heavy, suffocating. I nodded, my throat tight, unable to speak, my mind replaying his grin, his laugh, the way he'd offered to show up for Tammy, a moment that now felt like a glimpse into his violent mind. Aunt Clara cut contact with Kate after the conviction, unable to reconcile her friendship with the mother of a killer, especially when Kate denied Chad's guilt, clinging to a delusion that her son was innocent. My aunt cut contact with her friend Kate, who ended up denying her son was guilty of any of what he was charged with, and she left that job soon after for unrelated reasons, a decision that spoke of the betrayal she felt, the trust shattered by the truth of Chad's actions. Kate's denial added another layer of unease. How could she not see what her son was, what he'd done? It made me wonder about her, about the environment Chad had grown up in, about the signs she might have missed, the same signs I'd overlooked. That night on the deck, I couldn't stop thinking about the girl, the 17-year-old who'd survived Chad's attack, her bravery in testifying, her strength in the face of such horror. I found myself sketching her in my mind, a faceless figure with a scar on her throat, a symbol of survival, of resilience, her story a stark contrast to Chad's lack of remorse, his refusal to take responsibility for the pain he'd caused. I wanted to reach out, to thank her for her courage, to tell her how her survival had opened my eyes, but I didn't know her, couldn't find her, her name a blank in the articles, a necessary protection I understood, but mourned. Instead, I poured my emotions into my art, creating a series of sketches. Dark, shadowy figures on a deck, a girl with a scar, a courtroom scene. Each piece a release, a way to process the fear, the guilt, the what-ifs that haunted me. The party took on a new meaning in my memory, a moment of innocence tainted by the knowledge of what Chad had already done, what he was capable of. I wondered if I'd missed other signs, if there'd been a moment I could have acted, could have protected someone, though I knew there was nothing I could have done, nothing I could have known. The unease I'd felt, the heaviness in the air, had been real, a warning I'd ignored, a lesson I'd carry forward, a reminder to trust my instincts, to listen to the quiet voice that whispers of danger, even when the world seems safe. The shadow of Chad's crime lingered long after the news broke, a chilling reminder of the danger I'd unknowingly faced, reshaping my view of the world, my art, and the fragile line between safety and terror. I stopped attending family gatherings. For a while, the memory of that deck too raw, the thought of sharing space with another unknown guest too unsettling. My art became darker, more introspective. The sketches I'd started after learning about Chad evolving into a full series I titled Shadows on the Deck. Each piece a reflection of the fear, the guilt, the realization that I'd sat across from, a killer without knowing it. I displayed them at a local gallery, the series drawing attention for its raw emotion, though I never shared the full story behind it, the truth too personal, too haunting to voice. Viewers saw the darkness, the tension, but only I knew the weight of the real shadow that inspired it, the man who'd smiled at me over cake, who'd hidden his violence behind a grin. My relationship with my family shifted, our conversations, now tinged with a shared unease, a quiet acknowledgement of the danger we brushed against. Mom and I grew closer, our talks about Chad a way to process the fear, to remind ourselves we were safe, though the what-ifs lingered. What if he'd acted that night? What if he'd targeted one of us? Aunt Clara struggled with guilt, blaming herself for inviting Kate and Chad, for not seeing the signs, though we reassured her she couldn't have known, couldn't have predicted the monster in her midst. We all learned to be more cautious, to trust our instincts, to question the strangers we welcomed into our lives, a lesson born of necessity, of survival. I often think about the girl Chad attacked, her survival a beacon of hope in the darkness, of his actions, her courage a contrast to his cowardice, his lack of remorse. I wish I could tell her how her story impacted me, how it made me see the world differently, how it taught me to listen to the quiet warnings in my gut, the ones I'd ignored that night on the deck. I'll never know her name, never meet her, but she's a part of me now, a silent hero in my story, a reminder that even in the face of evil, there's strength, there's survival, there's hope. Chad's conviction, though a relief, didn't erase the fear, the knowledge that I'd been so close to a killer, that I'd shared space with someone capable of such violence. I carry that night with me, a shadow that lingers in my art, in my interactions, in the way I move through the world, a world I now know is far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined, where monsters can hide behind smiles, where safety is a fragile illusion, and where survival sometimes means listening to the quiet voice that whispers of danger, even when all seems well. The bullet through the night, a narrow escape from a road rage killer. On a quiet Wednesday night in April 2025, as I drove home from work, a deafening pop shattered the silence, followed by the chilling sight of a bullet hole piercing through my windshield. A deadly shot from a road-raging stranger that tore through my car, grazing the passenger seat just inches from my shoulder, a moment of terror that left me fighting for my life. I slammed on the gas, my heart pounding as I grabbed my phone, yelling to the automated assistant, "Call 911," while speeding toward a bank parking lot with security cameras, the only refuge I could think of. The person behind me has put a bullet hole through my car. I speed past my apartment while on the phone with the dispatcher and into the parking lot of another bank where there are plenty of security cameras, my voice trembling as I explained, the nightmare unfolding on the road. The bullet had traveled a straight path through my trunk, back seat and out the windshield, a high-velocity round that could have ended me if it had been just 6 inches to the left. I'm a 34-year-old software developer, used to late-night drives after long shifts. But that night, a simple commute turned into a brush with death, a story of survival I'd never forget. The evening had started like any other. I'd finished a grueling shift at the tech firm where I worked, my eyes bleary from hours of coding, my mind on the takeout waiting for me at home. I was on a two-lane road in my city in the Mountain Time Zone, driving in the left lane, the faster lane as per US custom, when a sedan made a reckless right-hand turn at an intersection. Instead of merging into the empty right lane, the driver cut directly in front of me, forcing me to brake hard to avoid a collision. I was in the left lane of the two-lane road when a sedan makes a right-hand turn at an intersection, but instead of turning into the right lane that is otherwise unoccupied, this person pulls out in front of me, the audacity of the move igniting a spark of frustration in me. I swerved into the right lane to pass, maintaining my speed, but the sedan cut me off again, weaving dangerously, their erratic driving a clear sign of trouble. I flashed my high beams briefly, a quick signal of annoyance, hoping they'd get the hint and drive more carefully. Instead, they sped up, tailgating me, their headlights glaring in my rearview mirror, a menacing presence that turned my irritation into unease. I move back over into the left-hand lane and past them. No sooner do I do this, but this person is now tailgating me, the closeness of their car a threat I couldn't ignore, my grip tightening on the wheel as I glanced at the approaching intersection, my turn just ahead. I signaled to move into the right lane for my turn, hoping to shake them, but they followed, cutting from the middle lane to mirror my move, their intent clear. They weren't just reckless, they were targeting me, a predator on the road with motives I couldn't yet fathom. The sedan's relentless pursuit turned my routine drive into a high-stakes chase, each maneuver a desperate bid to escape a threat I couldn't outrun, a danger that escalated with every passing second. I reached the intersection, my heart racing as I stopped at the red light, my eyes darting between the traffic ahead and the sedan behind me, its headlights a menacing glow in my rearview mirror. At the last second, I swerved into the right lane, hoping to lose them, but they followed, their car sticking to mine like a shadow, their intent undeniable. I make my way to the intersection that I need to turn at and start in the left-hand lane, eventually moving over to the right and making my right-hand turn. Suddenly the car moves from the middle lane, where one would continue straight through the intersection, to follow me making a right turn. Their persistence a clear sign I was in danger, a realization that sent a chill down my spine as I gripped the wheel, my mind racing for a way out. I knew I couldn't lead them to my apartment, the thought of this stranger knowing where I lived, a risk I couldn't take. I spotted a bank and a bar on my right, their parking lot a potential escape route, and I veered into it, weaving through the empty spaces, hoping to shake them. I'm on the left lane again after turning, and they're still right behind me. There's a red light ahead and I stop, but not before moving to the right lane at the last minute, to try and lose the person who I realize is now following me, my tires squealing as I maneuvered, the sedan still on my tail, their headlights a constant threat in the darkness. I reached for my pocket, instinctively searching for my knife, a habit from years of late-night drives, but my heart sank. I'd left it in another jacket, buried in my laundry basket at home, leaving me defenseless against an enemy I couldn't see. I was about to turn left, heading back toward my apartment or through downtown to lose them, when I heard a loud pop, a sound I initially thought was something thrown at my car, a petty act of road rage. But then I saw it, a nearly perfect circular hole in my windshield, the glass splintering around it, a bullet's path unmistakable. I hear a loud pop and think they've just thrown something at my car. No sooner do I realize this when I see a large, nearly perfect circular hole in the front windshield of my car, the reality crashing over me like a wave. This wasn't just road rage. This was attempted murder, a high-velocity round that had torn through my vehicle, a shot meant for me. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and activated the assistant, yelling, "Call 911!" as I sped past my apartment, my only thought to find safety, to survive a night that had turned deadly in an instant. The dispatcher answered, her voice calm but urgent, as I explained, "Someone shot at my car. There's a bullet hole through my windshield." I aimed for another bank parking lot, one I knew had security cameras. a place where I could be seen, where evidence of this nightmare would be captured. I pulled in, my car screeching to a stop, and I stepped out, hands raised to show the arriving police. I was unarmed, my voice trembling as I recounted the chase, the shot, the terror that had unfolded on a road I'd driven 100 times before. The aftermath of the shooting left me trembling in the bank parking lot. The bullet's path through my car, a stark reminder of how close I'd come to death, a moment of survival that came with a new wave of fear. I stood under the harsh glare of the bank's security lights, my hands still raised as 2 police cars screeched into the lot, their lights flashing, a surreal scene that felt like something out of a movie. I realized there's a hole in the passenger seat as well, and within minutes 2 police cars arrive, and I get out of the car with my hands up to show them I'm unarmed, my voice shaking as I explained the chase, the bullet, the terror that had unfolded on the road. The officers approached cautiously, their hands on their holsters, but their expressions softened as they saw the damage, a bullet hole in the trunk, through the back seat, grazing the top left shoulder of the passenger seat and exiting through the windshield, glass fragments scattered across my dashboard like a deadly constellation. I lowered my hands at their gesture, my legs weak as I leaned against my car, the reality of my survival sinking in. When I'm able to look at my car again, I see a bullet hole in the trunk that goes through the back seat, grazes the top left shoulder of the passenger seat in the front, and comes out my windshield. There's broken glass fragments everywhere on the dashboard. The path of the bullet, a straight line of destruction that could have ended my life. The officers inspected the damage, one of them whistling low as he traced the trajectory with his flashlight, muttering, "You're damn lucky, man." I nodded, my throat tight, the words echoing in my mind. 6 inches to the left, and the bullet would have torn through my shoulder. 6 inches higher, and I wouldn't be standing here telling my story. They took my statement, their questions sharp but efficient. Where had it happened? What did the car look like? Had I seen the driver? I recounted every detail I could remember. The sedan's reckless turn, the tailgating, the pop of the gunshot, the hole in my windshield, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me. I described the car as best I could. A dark sedan, maybe black or navy, but I hadn't seen the license plate. My focus on survival rather than details. The officers assured me they'd use the bank's security footage to track the vehicle, a small comfort in the chaos. Though I couldn't shake the fear that this wasn't over, that the shooter might still be out there, watching, waiting. Drove home after they cleared me to leave. My car a battered relic of the night's horror, the hole in the windshield a constant reminder of my brush with death. I parked, locked the doors and sat in my apartment. The silence deafening, my mind replaying the moment of the shot, the sound of glass shattering, the dispatcher's voice on the phone. I couldn't sleep, the what-ifs haunting me. What if I'd been slower? What if the bullet had hit me? What if they came back? The night stretched on, a sleepless vigil, my hand still trembling as I clutched a cup of cold coffee. The weight of survival a heavy burden I wasn't sure I could carry. The investigation that followed offered a grim glimpse into the shooter's world, a tangled web of crime that left me both relieved and unsettled, a reminder of the violence lurking just beneath the surface of my city. The day after the shooting, Thursday, I received a call from an investigator assigned to my case, his voice calm but serious as he explained his next steps. "I want to try to recover the bullet," he said, a statement that made me laugh out, loud despite the fear still gripping me. The day after this event, a Thursday, I received a call from an investigator who was assigned to my case. He told me I want to try to recover the bullet, my response a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. I told him it had gone straight through, from the trunk to the windshield, a clean shot that left nothing to recover. He asked me to come in the following day for forensic ballistics, and I agreed, though the thought of revisiting the incident made my stomach churn. I arrived at the police station on Friday at 5 p.m., my shift at work looming, but the investigator wasn't there, the receptionist informing me he'd been called away. I waited an hour before leaving, frustration mixing with relief. I wasn't ready to relive the night to see the bullet's path mapped out in forensic detail. When I got to work and sat at my desk, my phone rang, the investigator apologizing for his absence. I got a call from the investigator apologizing for not being at the police station. I don't know if you heard the news, but there was another shooting last night at 8 p.m. I was also working that case, and this actually has everything to do with you." His words sending a chill down my spine as he explained the connection. The night before, just 22 hours after my incident, there'd been another shooting at a nearby gas station. A drug deal gone wrong, one person in the hospital, and the same vehicle identified in my case had been requisitioned as evidence in the second shooting. The details were sparse but chilling. The people involved in both shootings were facing significant felony charges, likely life in prison, their crimes a web of violence that extended far beyond my encounter. My case, however, wouldn't move forward. The bullet couldn't be recovered, its path too clean, leaving no evidence to tie the shooter directly to me. I won't be able to have a case, since the bullet couldn't be recovered. More on that shortly. The people involved that shot my car and the other individual who ended up shooting them in the drug deal would all be facing significant felony charges, likely life in prison. A bittersweet relief that left me safe but unsatisfied. The lack of closure, a weight I couldn't shake. I didn't know if the shooter in the hospital would survive, but it would determine the nature of the charges, a detail the investigator kept vague, his tone hinting at a case far larger than my own. I changed my license plate as soon as the tax commissioner's office opened on Monday, a small act of protection, a way to ensure this wouldn't come back to me, though the fear lingered, a shadow I couldn't escape. The investigator promised updates, but I knew my role in this story was over, a footnote in a larger tale of crime and violence, a survivor left to pick up the pieces of a night that had nearly ended me. The bullet's path through my car became a permanent scar, a reminder of a night that changed me, leaving me to grapple with the fragility of safety, the randomness of violence, and the gratitude of survival. I couldn't bring myself to drive that car for weeks. The hole in the windshield, a gaping wound I couldn't ignore. The glass fragments on the dashboard, a haunting reminder of how close I'd come to death. I had it repaired, the windshield replaced, the seats cleaned, but the memory lingered, a ghost in the upholstery, a whisper in the hum of the engine. The investigator's words echoed in my mind. The bullet was a high-velocity rifle round, its trajectory a straight line through my vehicle, a path of destruction that could have ended me. The bullet was a relatively large high-velocity rifle round, so the bullet trajectory showed no deviation in the path of the travel through the entire vehicle. There was a perfectly straight line in the ballistic rods, from the trunk, through the seats all the way to the exit point in the windshield, a fact that made my survival feel like a miracle, a stroke of luck I couldn't fully comprehend. I told my story to a few close friends, their faces pale as they listened, their hands reaching for mine as I described the pop, the hole, the chase. They called me lucky, a word I clung to, though it felt hollow. Lucky to be alive, yes, but the cost was a new fear, a wariness that hadn't been there before. I avoided that road for months, taking longer routes to work, my eyes scanning for dark sedans, my heart racing at every tailgater. The memory of that night, a constant companion. I installed a dash cam, kept my phone closer, my emergency contacts on speed dial, a vigilance that became second nature, a shield against a world I now knew could turn deadly in an instant. I often think about the shooter, the man in the hospital, his fate uncertain, his crimes a web I'd stumbled into by chance. I wondered what drove him. Rage, drugs, a darkness I couldn't fathom. A question I'd never answer, a mystery that lingered like the bullet's path through my car. I was grateful for the bank's cameras, for the police's quick response, for the 6 inches that had saved my life, but gratitude came with guilt. Why had I survived when others, like the victim in the gas station shooting, hadn't? I didn't know, couldn't know, the randomness of it all, a weight I carried, a reminder of the fragility of safety, the thin line between life and death. I'm different now. My late-night drive's a thing of the past, my trust in the road, in strangers, forever altered. I keep my story close, a tale of survival I share sparingly, a lesson in vigilance, in luck, in the unpredictability of violence, a night that left a scar, not on my body, but on my soul, a reminder that even on the quietest roads danger can lurk, waiting for a moment to strike. The Airbnb nightmare, a creepy encounter abroaders. I crept back into the eerie Airbnb to retrieve my belongings after a concert. My heart stopped at the sight of the disheveled old man I'd met earlier, now snoring on the dusty couch in a Snorlax. Fancy hooked to an oxygen tank, until I tripped over his tubes, ripping them free, the hiss of gas waking him in a gasping panic as I bolted out the door, fleeing a house that felt like a trap. The surreal image of him in that Pokemon costume, his labored breathing echoing in the abandoned-looking entrance, was the final straw in a night already steeped in dread. The old man was just snoring on the couch directly in front of the entrance door. The strangest part about him was that he was now wearing, and I'm not joking when I say this, a Snorlax onesie. You know, like the Pokemon. And even strange, I saw that he was hooked up to oxygen some tank. His presence a chilling mystery in a house that had already unnerved me with its unlocked doors and creepy decor. I'm a 25-year-old solo traveler, drawn to the dark and gothic. But that night in a foreign city, my cheap Airbnb booking turned into a nightmare I'd never forget. A descent into a house that felt more like a haunted trap than a place to rest. 2 weeks earlier, I'd booked the Airbnb for a quick trip to attend a concert in a European city I'd always wanted to visit, a chance to see my favorite band live. The listing was cheap, a steal for a one-night stay, and I knew I wasn't getting a 5-star hotel. My expectations were low. As long as I had a bed and a shower, I'd manage. About 2 weeks ago, I booked an Airbnb in another country. I was going there for a concert. The room was cheap, so I knew that I wasn't going to stay in a 5-star hotel, but it was only for one night, a practical decision for a budget traveler like me, always chasing experiences over luxury. I packed light, my excitement for the concert overshadowing any concerns. Though my trip started on a sour note, my data roaming didn't work in this country, leaving me disconnected as I logged into a cafe's Wi-Fi to plan my route to the house. I arrived on time, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows as I rang the only bell at the address, waiting for my host, Tim, to answer. No one came. I rang again and again, 5 minutes passing with no response, my unease growing as I peered through the mail slot in the door. What I saw made my stomach drop. The entrance looked like an abandoned barn, a dusty couch blocking the doorway, furniture draped in cloth, the air thick with neglect. I managed to be at the house in time and rang the only bell and waited. Nobody came out. I repeatedly rang and waited 5 minutes, and I noticed the door had a slot for mail and looked through it, and I was shocked to see an entrance that looked like an abandoned barn. The sight so far from the cozy Airbnb I'd imagined that I wondered if I'd come to the wrong place. My excitement for the concert replaced by a creeping dread. Just then, a super old, unwashed-looking man shuffled toward the door from the street, his clothes rumpled, his hair greasy, a faint stench of cigarettes trailing him. I asked if he knew where the Airbnb was, and he mumbled something I took as a yes. So I asked if he was Tim, my host. He nodded, saying, "Yes," and opened the door, his heaving coughs and labored steps adding to my unease as I followed him inside. The creaky staircase and abandoned decor setting the stage for a night I'd never forget. The house's eerie interior deepened my unease as I followed the man who claimed to be Tim, each step revealing more signs of neglect and strangeness, a prelude to the terror that would soon drive me away. We entered the house, the air thick with dust, the dim light casting shadows over the cluttered space, the centerpiece, a creaky old staircase that groaned under our weight as we ascended. The centerpiece was definitely the super old creaky staircase that led to the upper part of the house. And I followed him upstairs. He was heaving and coughing and stinking of cigarettes, his labored breathing a constant reminder of his frail state, the smell of smoke clinging to him like a second skin, an unpleasant companion in an already unsettling environment. The second floor was no better, dark, abandoned-looking with furniture draped in cloth, a cluttered mess that felt more like a storage attic than a home, a heavy curtain blocking any glimpse of what lay beyond, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. We climbed another set of stairs to my hallway, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The walls were cracked, adorned with old rural paintings and crosses, the decor straight out of a horror movie, the kind of place that should have been thrilling for a goth like me, but instead felt wrong, neglected, dangerous. Another stair up and we were in my hallway. which was honestly the worst one, cracks in the wall, old rural paintings and crosses hung up next to them. It seriously looked like the set of a horror movie, the eerie stillness broken only by Tim's wheezing, his presence a looming shadow as he showed me the bathroom, a space as decrepit as the rest of the house. The bathtub had a huge hole in the tiling, the walls stained with grime, everything so dirty I recoiled at the thought of using it, my skin crawling at the sight. Tim then led me to the bedroom, the only space that seemed marginally okay, though it was far from comforting. The shelves were lined with creepy dolls, their glass eyes staring blankly, a detail that threw me off despite my love for the macabre. He showed me to the bedroom, which was honestly okay, and there was just a lot of creepy dolls on the shelves. That just completely threw me off. Their presence a silent threat, a reminder that this house was not a safe haven but a place of unease, a gothic nightmare turned too real. I asked about Wi-Fi, hoping for some connection to the outside world, but Tim shook his head saying no, a blow that left me isolated, my phone useless without data, my only lifeline severed. I asked about checkout the next day, and his vague response, "It doesn't matter, whatever," only deepened my unease, his nonchalance a stark contrast to the growing dread in my chest. Tim dragged himself up to the 4th floor, the space pitch black, the darkness so thick it felt alive, a void that swallowed the faint light from below, adding to the house's sinister aura. I stood in the bedroom, the doll's eyes seeming to follow me, my mind racing with questions. Why was this place so neglected? Why was there no Wi-Fi? Why was Tim so indifferent? The house felt wrong, a trap masquerading as a rental, and I knew I couldn't stay, the creeping dread too strong to ignore. The gothic allure I usually loved now a source of terror. The house's lack of security and eerie remnants pushed my fear to a breaking point, forcing me to make a desperate decision to flee, a choice that would soon lead to an even stranger encounter. I returned to the bathroom to change, my concert outfit still in my bag, but the sight of the door, no lock, not even a latch, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. The toilet, my bedroom door, none of them had locks, leaving me vulnerable in a house that already felt like a predator's. Liar! When I went to the bathroom, I realized that I didn't even notice the creepiest part. There were no locks at all, not for the bathroom, not for the toilet, and not for my room, which freaked me out, the realization hitting me like a physical blow, my heart racing as I imagined someone, Tim or worse, walking in while I slept, the lack of barriers a threat I couldn't ignore. I noticed half-used items scattered around, shower gels, toothbrushes, toothpaste, a random lash curler abandoned on the shelf, not in a here-for-your-use way, but as if someone had left them in a hurry, a chilling sign of previous guests, who might have fled like I now planned to. My mind spun with dark scenarios. What if these items belonged to people who'd stayed here before me, people who'd never left, their reviews missing because they couldn't write them? I also noticed that there were so many half-used items that someone looked like guest before me had left there, like shower gels and toothbrushes and toothpaste. A random lash curler just lay abandoned on the shelf, the thought sending a shiver down my spine, my imagination conjuring images of vanished travelers, their belongings a silent warning of danger. I'd made up my mind. I wouldn't stay the night. The house's creepiness too much for even a goth like me, my love for the macabre no match for the real fear gripping me. I debated taking all my stuff to the concert, my heavy backpack, a burden I didn't want to carry, but the thought of leaving anything behind felt like leaving a piece of myself in this trap. I settled on taking my essentials, phone, wallet, concert ticket, and slid a folded piece of paper under the bedroom door, a trick to see if anyone entered while I was gone, a small act of precaution in a house that offered none. I already made up my mind that I would definitely not be staying the night in this house. My mind was just kind of spinning with different scenarios. I just took my essentials and left the room as soon as I could not, without sliding of folded paper. Under the door, my hands trembling as I adjusted my bag, the doll's eyes seeming to watch me as I left, their silent judgment a weight on my shoulders. I descended the creaky stairs, each step a reminder of the house's decay, my heart pounding as I reached the entrance, the dusty couch and draped furniture a haunting tableau that urged me to run. As I approached the door, I heard a key turning. In the lock, my breath catching as I braced myself for another encounter with Tim. But the man who entered wasn't the disheveled old man I'd met. He was middle-aged, clean-cut, his demeanor far more composed. "Hi, I'm Tim," he said. His voice calm, friendly even, and I froze, my mind reeling. Who was the other man, the one who'd let me in if this was Tim? I forced a smile, making brief small talk as I edged toward the door. My fear a living thing as I fled the house. The concert, my only escape from a nightmare that had only just begun. The concert offered a brief reprieve from the house's terror, but exhaustion drove me back to retrieve my belongings, a decision that led to a surreal and terrifying encounter that confirmed my worst fears. I made it to the concert venue just in time, the music a welcome distraction, the crowd's energy a stark contrast to the oppressive stillness of the house. My favorite band played, their dark melodies a perfect match for my gothic soul, and, for a few hours, I lost myself in the rhythm, the lights, the shared excitement of the fans around me. But as the concert ended, exhaustion hit hard. My body ached from the day's travel, my mind heavy with the dread of returning to that house. I knew I couldn't stay awake all night, couldn't risk sleeping there. So I checked into a hostel instead, its cleanliness far from perfect, but a godsend compared to the Airbnb, with Wi-Fi, a proper shower, and most importantly, a door with a lock. I was thrown out of the hostel at 10 a.m. the next morning, the early checkout a harsh reminder of my disrupted plans, my body still heavy with fatigue as I made my way back to the house to retrieve the rest of my stuff. The next day I got thrown out at 10 a.m., so I made my way to the rest of my stuff, I don't know why. But I checked the mail slot again and jumped back, my curiosity overriding my fear as I peered through the slot, only to jump back in shock. The old man who'd let me in, the one I'd thought was Tim, was snoring on the dusty couch directly in front of the entrance, his frail body now dressed in a Snorlax onesie, a surreal sight that would have been comical if not for the oxygen. Tank sprawled across the floor, its tubes leading to his nose, a detail that turned the scene from absurd to menacing. I hesitated, my heart pounding as I weighed my options. Leave my stuff and run, or risk going in to grab it. The thought of losing my belongings, battling with the fear of facing this man again. I steeled myself, creeping inside, my footsteps light as I navigated past him. His snores a low rumble that filled the dusty space, the air heavy with the smell of cigarettes and something medicinal, a mix that made my stomach churn. I climbed, the creaky stairs, each step a test of my courage, my eyes darting to the shadows, half expecting someone or something to emerge from the darkness. I reached my room, my breath catching as I saw the door slightly ajar, the folded paper I'd left under it disturbed, a clear sign someone had been inside, the violation sending a fresh wave of panic through me. I grabbed my bag, my hands shaking, as I noticed the lash curler on the shelf, now emanating a faint burnt hair smell, as if it had been recently used, a detail that made my skin crawl. Someone had been in my room, touching my things, while I was gone. I didn't wait to investigate, my fear propelling me back down the stairs, my only thought to escape this house, this trap before it claimed me. My escape from the Airbnb was a frantic dash, the old man's gasp echoing behind me as I fled, leaving behind a house that felt like a predator's lair, a nightmare that reshaped my love for solo travel. As I hurried down the stairs, my focus. On the door I didn't see the oxygen tubes trailing across the floor, my foot catching them in a clumsy stumble that ripped them from the tank. A loud hiss filled the air, the gas escaping in a rush as the old man woke with a start, his gasps. For air, a desperate choking sound that sent me into a panic. I accidentally tripped over the old guy's oxygen tubes, ripping them out of the tank. It immediately let out a loud hissing sound, and the old man woke up almost instantly, gasping for air, his eyes wide with shock as he clutched at his throat. His Snorlax onesie, a grotesque contrast to the terror of the moment. I stammered, I'm sorry, over and over, my voice trembling as I bolted for the door, throwing it open and running into the street, my heart pounding as I left the house and its mysteries behind. I didn't stop running until I was blocks away, my bag slung over my shoulder, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to process what had just happened. In that moment I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I was so freaked out that I just said I'm sorry a million times and ran to the door, threw it open and bowled out, the old man's gasps echoing in my mind, a sound that haunted me as I fled. The image of him in that onesie, hooked to oxygen, a surreal nightmare I couldn't unsee. I don't know if I overreacted, but everything about that house, the abandoned decor, the unlocked doors, the two men claiming to be Tim, the used lash curler, screamed danger, a setup for something far worse than a bad stay, a trap I'd narrowly escaped. I made it to the train station, my ticket to the airport a lifeline, my mind racing with what-ifs. What if I'd stayed the night? What if I'd confronted the old man? What if the real Tim had been someone else entirely? I reported the Airbnb listing as soon as I had Wi-Fi, my fingers trembling as I typed a warning, a plea for others to avoid that house, though I doubted it would do much good. The experience reshaped my love for solo travel, a passion I'd always cherished, now tainted by fear, by the knowledge that even a cheap booking could hide a nightmare. I still travel, still chase concerts and gothic adventures, but I'm different now, more cautious, more aware. The memory of that house, a shadow, that lingers, a reminder that sometimes the darkness I love can be all too real. The childhood abduction, a narrow escape from a stranger. On a quiet afternoon in 1995, when I was just a toddler, the sound of police sirens pierced the air as officers found me standing alone, blocks away from my aunt's house in a small suburban neighborhood, abandoned by a stranger who'd snatched me from the front yard moments after my mother stepped inside. A chilling escape my family believes was triggered by the approaching wail of those sirens. I was too young to remember the details, but the story has been etched into our family's history, a tale of terror and survival that haunts us to this day. When the cops got there, they drove around and ended up finding me multiple blocks away, just standing outside of the very house my uncle said was the guy. They never made any arrests on the guy. The mystery of why I was left there, unharmed but alone, a puzzle that would never be solved. I'm now a 32-year-old writer, piecing together the fragments of that day through my family's accounts, a childhood abduction that could have ended in tragedy, but instead became a story of narrow escape, a moment that shaped my life in ways I'm only beginning to understand. It was a warm summer day in our small town, the kind where kids played outside until the streetlights came on, the air filled with the hum of cicadas and the laughter of children. My family had gathered at my Aunt Linda's house, a modest two-story home with a sprawling front yard, a place where my sister Emily, then 5 or 6, and I, barely 1 or 2, often played while the adults chatted inside. Me and my sister were at her aunt's house. My mum and myself and my sister were outside in the front yard, the grass soft beneath our feet, the sun casting long shadows as Emily chased me around, giggling, our innocent play a snapshot of a simpler time. Mom had stepped inside for a moment, maybe to grab a glass of water, maybe to help with lunch, leaving us under Emily's watchful eye. A decision that seemed safe in the quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other, where danger felt like a distant concept. Emily at her young age was too little to be left in charge of a toddler, a fact my family would later lament, though no one could have predicted what would happen next. We were playing near the edge of the yard, close to the sidewalk, when a man appeared, someone my family would later describe as a shadowy figure, a stranger in a place where strangers stood out. I don't remember him. My memories of that age, limited to flashes of color and sound, but my family's accounts paint a picture of a man who moved with purpose, his presence unnoticed until it was too late. In the brief moments Mum was gone, he scooped me up, my tiny body no match for his grip, and vanished down the street, leaving Emily alone, confused, her cries unheard, as the man disappeared with me into the afternoon haze. The realization hit when Mum returned to the yard, her smile fading as she saw Emily standing alone, her little face crumpled in confusion. "Where's your sister?" she asked, her voice sharp with panic, the kind of fear only a mother can feel when her child is missing. Emily's stammered response, that a man had taken me, sent Mom into a frenzy, her shouts echoing through the house as she called for my uncles, her brothers to help. The family sprang into action, a desperate search beginning in those frantic moments, a race against time to find me before the unthinkable happened. The panic that gripped my family in those moments turned our quiet afternoon into a frantic search. A race against time to find me. A toddler stolen from the safety of our yard by a stranger whose motives we'd never fully understand. Mom's screams brought my uncles running. Uncle Mike, the eldest, and Uncle Tom, the hothead who'd never backed down from a fight. They piled into Mike's old pickup truck, the engine roaring to life as they tore out of the driveway, their faces set with determination, their voices a mix of fear and rage as they shouted my name into the neighborhood. My uncle of the time had drove around the area searching for me. He had a feeling about who he knew it was. Uncle Mike's gut telling him who might be responsible. A man who lived a few blocks away. A loner the neighbors whispered about. Someone who'd always given off an odd vibe, though no one had ever had proof of wrongdoing. They sped to his house, a rundown two-story with peeling paint and a sagging porch, the kind of place that looked like it held secrets in its shadows. Mike banged on the door, his fists pounding hard enough to rattle the frame, shouting for the man to come out to give me back, but there was no answer. The house silent except for the echo of his knocks. Tom, his temper flaring, wanted to break in to kick down the door and search every room, his protective instincts overriding reason. "I'll kill him if he's touched her," he growled, his hands clenched into fists, but Mike held him back, his cooler head prevailing as he reminded. Tom, they needed proof, needed to be smart, needed to find me without landing themselves in jail. He had a feeling about who he knew it was, and was on the verge of breaking into the guy's house because he banged on his door multiple times and was ignored. The tension between action and restraint, a tightrope they walked as they stood on. That porch, the seconds ticking by, each one a lifetime for my desperate family. Back at Aunt Linda's, Mom was on the phone with the police, her voice breaking as she explained what had happened, her hands shaking as she clutched the receiver, her eyes darting to the yard where I'd last been. "She's only 2, she kept saying, her voice a plea, a prayer, as the dispatcher promised to send officers immediately to canvass the area, to do everything they could. Aunt Linda held Emily, who was crying now, her little body trembling as she tried to explain what she'd seen. A man, tall, in a dark shirt, walking away with me in his arms, her words a jumbled mess of fear and guilt, though no one blamed. Her no one could, the fault lying with the monster who'd taken me. The neighborhood came alive with the sound of sirens, the flashing lights of police cars cutting through the late afternoon haze as officers arrived, their questions sharp and urgent as they gathered details from Mom and Emily. They fanned out, some on foot, some in their cruisers, searching the streets, knocking on doors, calling my name into the quiet air. A community united in the desperate hope of finding a child before it was too late. My family clung to each other, their fear a tangible thing, a weight that pressed down on them. As they waited, prayed, and hoped for a miracle in the face of every parent's worst nightmare. The search for me ended with a moment of relief that came with lingering dread, as police found me standing alone, blocks away, a discovery that raised more questions than answers about the man who'd taken me. It wasn't long before the officers found me, standing alone on a quiet street, several blocks from Aunt Linda's house, my tiny body dwarfed by the empty sidewalk, my face streaked with dirt but unharmed, a sight that brought tears of relief to my family's eyes. When the cops got there, they drove around and ended up finding me multiple blocks away, just standing outside of the very house my uncle said was the guy, the exact spot Uncle Mike had suspected, the house of the man he'd banged on the door. Of a chilling confirmation of his gut feeling, though the man himself was nowhere to be found. I was barefoot, my little sundress wrinkled, my eyes wide but silent, too young to explain what had happened, too young to understand the danger I'd been in. The police scooped me up, one officer wrapping me in his jacket as he radioed back. To the others, his voice a mix of relief and urgency as he confirmed I'd been found. They brought me back to Aunt Linda's, where Mum ran to me, her sobs echoing through the yard as she pulled me into her arms, her hands trembling as she checked me for injuries, her tears soaking my hair as she whispered, "Thank God, thank God." Emily clung to her side, her own tears falling as she reached for my hand, her guilt a heavy weight despite her young age, though Mom reassured her it wasn't her fault, that she'd done nothing wrong. Uncle Mike and Tom stood nearby, their faces a mix of relief and rage, their eyes darting to the street as if the man might appear at any moment. their protective instincts still on high alert. The officers questioned my family, trying to piece together what had happened, their notebooks filling with details as Mom recounted the timeline, how long she'd been inside, how long I'd been missing, what Emily had seen. They suspected the man had panicked when he heard the sirens, abandoning me on the street to avoid being caught, a theory that explained my sudden reappearance but left a bitter taste in their mouths. They never made any arrests on the guy, and I don't even think they questioned him. My family says that they think once he heard the sirens coming, he panicked and just left me outside to be found. The lack of action, a source of frustration for my family, who wanted justice, who wanted answers, who wanted to know why this man had targeted me, what he'd planned to do if the sirens hadn't intervened. I was too young to be hurt in any meaningful way, my body unmarked, my mind unscarred by memories I couldn't retain, but the incident left a mark on my family, a wound that never fully healed. They took me to the doctor the next day just to be sure, the pediatrician confirming I was fine. Though Mom watched me like a hawk for weeks, her fear a constant shadow as she replayed those moments, blaming herself for stepping inside, for leaving us alone. Though no one could have predicted such a thing in their quiet town, the lack of justice in the wake of my abduction left my family grappling with fear and frustration, a mystery that haunted them as they tried to piece together the man's motives, a shadow that lingered over our lives. The police investigation stalled quickly, their resources limited in our small town, their focus shifting to other cases as the days turned to weeks, the man who'd taken me becoming a ghost in their files. They never questioned him, never searched his house, the lack of evidence, my inability to speak, Emily's vague description, leaving them with little to go on, a fact that infuriated Uncle Tom, who wanted to take matters into his own hands, to confront the man himself, to make him pay for what he'd done. Mom and Mike held him back, their voices a mix of reason and exhaustion, as they reminded him we were safe now that I was home, that they couldn't risk losing anyone else to this nightmare. My family tried to piece together the man's motives, their late-night conversations a mix of fear and speculation as they sat around Aunt Linda's kitchen table, the air heavy with the weight of the unknown. My family says that they think once he heard the sirens coming, he panicked and just left me outside to be found because there was no way a baby that just recently started walking could have wandered that far off on my own, the logic sound, but unsatisfying. A theory that explained my survival but not his intent. Had he planned to ransom me, to hurt me, to take me far away where no one would find me? The questions gnawed at them, a constant reminder of how close they'd come to losing me, how fragile safety could be, even in a town where everyone knew your name. Mom became hyper-vigilant, her eyes always on us when we played outside, her hands never far from her phone, ready to call for help at the slightest hint of danger. She installed new locks on the doors, kept the curtains drawn. Fear a living thing that shaped our childhood, a shadow that followed us even on the sunniest days. Emily too carried the weight of that day, her guilt a silent burden as she grew up, her protective instincts toward me a constant, a big sister who'd never let me out of her sight again, who'd never forgive herself for those moments she couldn't stop the man who'd taken me. The neighborhood changed too. Parents kept their kids closer, whispers about the man spreading like wildfire, his house a place to avoid, a dark spot on the map of our town. Some said he'd moved away, others that he still lived there, watching from behind his curtains, waiting for another chance. The rumors a mix of fear and imagination that kept us on edge. My family never saw him again, never got the answers they craved, the lack of closure a wound that festered, a mystery that became a part of our story, a cautionary tale we'd passed down through the years. The abduction became a defining moment in my family's history, a story of survival that shaped us, leaving me to grapple with a past I couldn't remember but could never escape, a legacy of fear and resilience. I grew up hearing the story, my family recounting it at gatherings, their voices a mix of relief and lingering dread as they described the day I was taken, the day they got me back. I don't remember it myself, my mind too young to hold the memory, but the weight of it has shaped me, a shadow I've carried through my 32 years, a writer now piecing together the fragments of a past that feels both foreign and intimate. The story is a part of me, a piece of my family's lore, a tale of survival that reminds us how quickly safety can shatter, how fiercely love can fight to protect what matters most. Mom never forgave herself, though we've told her 1,000 times. It wasn't her fault, that no one could have predicted such a thing in our quiet town. She's softer now, her vigilance tempered by time, but I see the fear in her eyes when she looks at me, the memory of that day a scar that never fades. Emily too carries the weight. She's my fiercest protector, my best friend, her guilt. A quiet thing she's never fully let go of, though I've told her I don't blame her, that she was just a child, that we were both victims of a man's darkness. Uncle Mike and Tom still talk about that day, their voices hard with the anger of justice denied, their protective instincts a fire that never dims, a reminder of the lengths they'd go to for family. I've tried to find answers, searching online for records of the incident, for any trace of the man, but there's nothing, no arrests, no reports, just the stories my family tells, the whispers of a town that moved on but never forgot. I wonder about him sometimes. Who he was, why he took me, what he planned to do if the sirens hadn't come. Was he a predator, a trafficker, a man driven by some twisted impulse we'll never understand? The questions linger, a mystery I'll never solve, a part of my story that remains unwritten, a shadow that follows me as I write, as I live, as I navigate a world I now know can be far darker than I'd ever imagined. The abduction taught me resilience, a lesson I didn't know I'd learned until I was older, until I faced my own challenges and found strength I didn't know I had, a strength born in those moments I can't remember, in the love of a family that fought for me, that brought me home. I'm grateful for the sirens, for Uncle Mike's instincts, for the officers who found me, for the 6 inches that kept me alive in a different way. 6 inches of distance, of time, of luck, that separated me from a fate I'll never know. A story that ends in survival, in love, in the enduring power of family. The cult's grip, a brother. Lost to a religious delusion, in the chilling stillness of a late-night phone call in 2024, my brother Brian's voice cut through me like a blade, his calm declaration that he'd be cutting me off completely for a premonition wife he believed was coming, a haunting sign that the church he'd joined had turned him into a stranger, possibly trapped in a cult's dangerous grip. His words were delivered with a terrifying clarity, a certainty that made my skin crawl as he explained this unseen woman was more important than our lifelong bond. He assured me that he will be completely cutting me off because his premonition wife is more important than his relationship with me. His family, he spoke with such clarity that it was terrifying to be so deluded, yet so sure of yourself. His voice, devoid of the warmth I'd always known, replaced by a cold conviction that left me trembling. I'm a 26-year-old graphic designer, and Brian, once my closest confidant, had been my rock through childhood. Movie nights, family road trips, endless game sessions. But now, his sudden religious obsession had torn us apart, leaving me to fear for his sanity, his safety, and the brother I might never get back. We'd grown up in a small town in Ohio, our childhood a tapestry of normalcy. Family dinners, game nights, holidays filled with laughter, and road trips where we'd bicker over the playlist but always end up singing together. My brother Brian and I grew up very close. Movie nights with the family dinners game, nights, holidays, family road trips, all very normal stuff. Those memories a foundation that made his transformation all the more jarring. Brian was the bubbly one, the affectionate brother who'd hug me after a bad day, who'd stay up late playing video games with me, our laughter echoing through the house. But a year ago, after moving to a new city for a job in tech support, he changed. Overnight, he became extremely religious, a shift so sudden it felt like he'd been replaced by a stranger, his life consumed by a mysterious church he refused to name. It started subtly, texts about his new faith, mentions of a priest who'd become his only friend, a growing distance in our conversations. But soon it escalated, his messages turning preachy, his voice carrying a fervor that scared me. He'd end every call with the same question: are you ready to give your life to God or suffer in hell? Before ending each conversation, he will ask, are you ready to give your life to God or suffer in hell? a ritual that left me uneasy. His words a stark contrast to the brother who'd once teased me about my art projects, who'd never cared about religion in a family that wasn't particularly devout. I tried to brush it off, to support him in his new path, but the more I learned, the more I feared he'd been drawn into something sinister, a cult that was stripping him of everything he'd once been. I'd always been the skeptical one, the artist who saw the world through a lens of curiosity, but Brian's change challenged everything I thought I knew about him. Our last game night, a monthly ritual where we'd play online for hours, had been a glimmer of the old Brian. He'd laughed, stayed up until 2 a.m., refusing to let me log off. His joy a fleeting reminder of the brother I loved. But that joy was short-lived, replaced by a chilling announcement that would change everything, a declaration that left me questioning not just his faith, but his sanity and the shadowy influence that had taken him from me. Brian's descent into religious obsession unfolded with alarming speed, each new detail painting a picture of a man I no longer recognized, a brother whose faith had become a prison I couldn't break him out of. After moving to the new city, Brian had found this church, a place he kept secret, refusing to share its name or location, a red flag I couldn't ignore. He found a church in his new city that he is giving his life to, and he is completely isolated. And his only friend is the priest. He is secretive about what church it is, his evasiveness a stark contrast to the openness we'd always shared, a sign that something was deeply wrong. He spent all his time there, late nights every day, supposedly helping clean up. But the hours didn't add up, his life revolving around this mysterious place that seemed to consume him, body and soul. His isolation grew more pronounced. He had no friends outside the church, his social media filled only with religious content, his once vibrant life reduced to a single obsessive focus. He'd stopped watching movies, listening to music, even reading books that weren't church-approved, his world shrinking to the walls of that unseen building, his mind a fortress I couldn't breach. I tried to reach him, texting to check in, to confirm he was still alive, but his responses were curt, tinged with a fervor that scared me. "I'm serving a higher purpose now," he'd say, his words a sermon I didn't want to hear. Our family wasn't religious, had never been, and Brian had never shown interest in faith before, making his sudden devotion all the more jarring, a change that felt imposed, not chosen. He'd recently taken a missions trip to Mexico with the church, a detail he mentioned in passing, his voice flat as he described it, offering no specifics, no stories, just a vague, "It was enlightening." They took a missions trip to Mexico recently, and I can only imagine what in the world went on there. The lack of detail fueling my fears. What had they done there? What had they made him do? I imagined shadowy rituals, brainwashing sessions, a group of people preying on his loneliness in a new city, exploiting his need for connection to draw him into their fold. I asked questions, pressed for details, but he shut me down, his tone sharp. "You wouldn't understand, you're not ready." His dismissal a wall I couldn't climb, a barrier that left me feeling helpless, watching my brother slip further away with each passing day. Our monthly game nights, once a sacred ritual, became a battleground, his religious rants interrupting our laughter, his sermons a stark contrast to the carefree brother I'd known. I entertained his conversations, hoping to keep him close, to find a crack in the facade, but each session left me more unsettled, his words a reminder of the stranger he'd become, a man I loved but no longer knew. The church had taken him from me piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. My fear growing with every unanswered question, every cryptic response, every sign that pointed to a darkness I couldn't see but could feel in my bones. The final game night with Brian revealed the depth of his delusion, his chilling announcement a turning point that left me grappling with the fear that I'd lost him to a cult, a fear that grew with every disturbing detail. We'd been playing for hours that night, our usual mix of strategy games and trash talk, a rare moment where the old Brian seemed to surface, his laughter filling the headset, his playful taunts a reminder of the brother I'd grown up with. He wouldn't let me log off, his joy infectious as we played past midnight, the clock ticking toward 2 a.m., a fleeting connection that gave me hope. Our last game night, he had so much fun that he wouldn't let me log off until about 2 a.m., a moment of normalcy that felt like a lifeline, a chance to hold on to the brother I was losing. Though I knew it wouldn't last, knew the church's grip was too strong to break with a single night of games. But that hope shattered when I learned he'd given away his gaming console to a church member, a decision that felt like a betrayal, a rejection of our shared past, our bonding time. He gave it away because his future wife, a premonition by the way, is coming, and she wouldn't like him playing with other girls. His reasoning a delusion that made my stomach churn. A premonition wife he believed in with such certainty, it terrified me. He called me a few nights later to explain, his voice calm, detached as he laid out his reasoning. This unseen woman, a figment of his faith, was more important than me, than our family, than the life we'd built together. He spoke with a clarity that was horrifying, a belief so unshakable it felt like madness, a sign that the church had rewired his mind, turned him into someone I didn't recognize. I tried to reason with him, to remind him of our bond, of the nights we'd spent playing, laughing, sharing secrets, but he was unmoved, his faith a wall I couldn't breach. "I have to focus on my calling," he said, his voice cold. "The church needs me. My wife needs me." I asked about this wife, desperate for details, but he offered none, just vague assurances that she was coming, that God had shown him, that I wouldn't understand because I wasn't ready. His words echoed in my mind, a sermon I couldn't escape, a reminder of the brother I'd lost to a belief I couldn't comprehend, a faith that had taken him from me and left a stranger in his place. The call ended with a finality that broke my heart. He was moving overseas soon to find this so-called premonition wife, a journey he believed was his destiny, a path that would sever our bond completely. I sat in silence after hanging up, my headset on the table, the game still open on my screen, a relic of a connection that was gone, a brother who was gone, replaced by a man I didn't know, a man I feared I'd never get back. Brian's announcement sent shockwaves through our family. His decision to cut us off a wound that deepened our fear, leaving us to confront the chilling possibility that he was lost to a cult, a reality we couldn't ignore. I called my parents the next day, my voice trembling as I relayed what Brian had said, his declaration that he'd be cutting us off for this premonition wife, a blow they couldn't fathom. Mom cried, her voice breaking as she recounted a recent visit from Brian, a trip home that had left her unsettled, his silence a stark contrast to the bubbly son she'd raised. He recently took a trip back home to visit our family. My mom says the whole thing just felt wrong. He sat silent much of the time, observing. Otherwise, he looked far removed, even while looking right at her, her words painting a picture of a man we no longer knew, his energy a heavy weight that filled the room, his distance a sign of the church's grip, a grip that had stripped him of the affection we'd always known. Dad tried to reach him, calling to confront this decision, to understand why he'd cut me off, but Brian's response was evasive, chilling in its implications. When Dad asked, "Why you need to cut your sister off?" Brian avoided the question, Dad told me, his voice tight with anger. But he hinted at something about feelings for you that aren't right. Our dad called him, and when he asked for you to need to cut your sister off, you must feel for her in another way than as your sister and Brian avoided the question and didn't answer. The suggestion a horrifying twist, a sign that his mind had been warped by the church, that his delusion had taken a darker turn, one that left me reeling, sick with fear for what he'd become. Mum believed it was an attempt to remove temptation from his life, a theory that made my skin crawl, the idea that I, his sister, could be seen as anything but family, a distortion of reality that spoke to the depth of his brainwashing. My mother believes it's his attempt at removing the temptation, aka me, from his life. Her words a mix of sorrow and fear, a mother's desperate attempt to understand a son she'd lost, a son who'd been taken by a force we couldn't fight. We tried to find the church, to learn more about this priest, this place that had consumed him, but Brian's secrecy left us with nothing, no name, no address, just the haunting knowledge that he was in, deep, too deep to reach, too deep to save. I spent nights researching cults, religious psychosis, anything that might explain what had happened to him. My laptop screen a blur of articles and forums as I searched for answers, for a way to bring him back. The signs were there. Isolation, obsession, cutting off family. A textbook case of cult behavior. But knowing didn't help, didn't tell me how to save him, didn't ease the fear that he was gone for good, lost to a delusion that had twisted his mind, his heart, his soul. The loss of Brian to the church left me grappling with grief and fear. A brother I might never get back. A story of delusion that became a haunting reminder of the power of belief and the cost of losing someone to it. I haven't spoken to Brian. Since that call, his promise to cut me off a reality I can't escape. His absence a hole in my life that grows with each passing day. What type of church influences you to cut off family and friends? Apparently he'll be moving overseas to find his so-called premonition wife soon. The thought of him leaving the country, chasing a delusion halfway around the world, a nightmare I can't wake from. A fear that he's gone for good, that the church has taken him in a way I'll never be able to undo. I check his social media sometimes, hoping for a sign of the old Brian, but it's all religious posts, sermons, prayers, a digital echo of the man he's become. A man I don't know, a man I might never know again. I've lost sleep over this. My nights filled with worry, with the chilling possibility that Brian is in a cult, that he's suffering from religious psychosis, that his mind has been warped in ways I can't comprehend. I think about his words, the hint of feelings for me, a distortion that makes me sick, a sign of how far he's fallen, how deep the church's influence runs. I wonder what they did to him, what they said, what they made him believe to turn him against us, against me, against the family that loves him. I've tried reaching out, texting, calling, but he doesn't answer. His silence a wall I can't break through, a reminder that he's chosen this path, this calling, over us, over everything we once were. I've shared my story online, on forums, on Reddit, hoping for advice for others who've lost someone to a cult, for a way to bring him back. The responses are mixed. Some offer sympathy, others warn me to be careful, to protect myself, to accept that he might be gone. I can't accept that, not yet, not ever. The brother I love still in there somewhere, buried beneath the church's lies, beneath the delusion that's taken him from me. I hold on to the memories, movie nights, game nights, the laughter we shared, a lifeline to the Brian I knew, a hope that one day he'll come back, that he'll see through the church's grip, that he'll remember who he is, who we are. For now I grieve, I worry, I wait, a sister holding on to a love that refuses to let go, a love that fights against a darkness I can't see, a darkness that stole my brother, that left me with a story of loss, of delusion, of a cult's grip I may never break, a story that haunts me, a reminder that even the strongest bonds can be tested, can be broken by a belief that consumes all it touches. The Forest Lure, a friend's dark descent into violence. In the chilling aftermath of a school lunch outing in November 2024, my stomach dropped when I learned that Ben, a friend I'd once tried to understand, had viciously attacked our mutual friend Tom with a homemade blade. A violent act that got him expelled and confirmed my growing fear that he was a ticking time bomb with killer vibes. The attack left Tom with a wound near his wrist, a brutal reminder of Ben's darkness. A darkness I'd glimpsed when he lured us into the forest behind school, laughing maniacally as he spoke of setting a fire. Ben attacked Tom at school with a homemade blade, and I believe it was a razor from a pencil sharpener. Tom ended up with a wound near his wrist and Ben was expelled from school. The news a shock that turned my unease into terror, the realization that I'd been so close to someone, so dangerous, sending chills down my spine. I'm a 17-year-old high school student, navigating the complexities of teenage friendships, but Ben's descent into violence, his stalking, his threats, his graphic messages, left me questioning my safety, my instincts, and the fine line between a troubled peer and a potential killer. My encounters with Ben began earlier that year in the fall of my junior year when he joined my friend group through Tom, a mutual friend who'd known him since middle school. My encounters with this individual, who I'll call Ben, began in November 2024 at school. He was a friend of one of my friends, Tom, and eventually we became part of the same friend group, a connection that felt natural at first, a new addition to our circle of misfits who'd bonded over shared classes and late-night gaming sessions. Ben was always considered a bit creepy by the school population, his quiet demeanor and intense stare earning him whispers in the hallways. But I tried to look past it, to see the person beneath the rumors, to give him a chance. I've always been the empathetic one, the kid who'd rather listen than judge. But Ben's presence challenged that empathy from the start. His energy a heavy weight that I couldn't quite shake, a feeling I'd soon learn to trust. At first, I felt bad for my initial unease. I judged him too quickly, I thought, letting the school's gossip cloud my perception, assuming he was just awkward, misunderstood, like so many of us were at that age. We started hanging out regularly, sharing lunches, joking in the courtyard, and for a while it seemed like I'd been wrong about him, like he was just another kid trying to find his place. But then we were added to a WhatsApp group chat, and everything changed. His true nature revealing itself in a way that made my skin crawl, a darkness I couldn't ignore, a warning I wished I'd heeded sooner. The group chat became a window into Ben's mind, a place where he unleashed a side of himself I hadn't seen, a side that turned my cautious friendship into outright fear. It started small, random messages, offhand comments, but soon escalated into something far more disturbing, a glimpse into a violence I hadn't expected, a violence that would soon spill over into our real lives, leaving us all shaken, leaving me to question how close I'd come to a danger I couldn't have predicted. The group chat revealed Ben's disturbing obsessions, his messages a chilling prelude to the violence that would soon erupt, a darkness that began to seep into our real-world interactions. It started with the images, graphic, mindless pictures of gore, torture victims, and murdered children that Ben sent without warning, each one more horrifying than the last, a barrage that made my stomach churn. It was the constant, mindless images of gore that he would send pictures involving torture victims and murdered children. I don't know if the images were real, but they made me very uncomfortable, the uncertainty of their authenticity only adding to my unease, the possibility that they were real a thought I couldn't shake. I asked him to stop, my fingers trembling as I typed, "This isn't okay, Ben, please." But his response was cold, mocking, "Take a joke, stop being a baby," he wrote. His words a dismissal that stung, a sign that my discomfort meant nothing to him, that he thrived on the fear he caused. His messages grew darker, more personal. He claimed he'd killed a cat, describing it in vivid detail, his words a mix of pride and malice that made me sick, followed by disturbing fantasies involving people I knew, classmates whose names he twisted into violent scenarios. He responded by telling me to take a joke and to stop being a baby. And after that, he began sending messages claiming that he had killed a cat, along with disturbing fantasies involving people I knew. The specificity of his threats a chilling escalation, a sign that this wasn't just an edgelord phase, as my friends tried to convince me, but something far more dangerous, something real, something that felt like a warning I couldn't ignore. I wasn't sure what to believe. Was he just trying to shock us to get a reaction, or was he capable of the violence he described, a predator hiding behind a screen, waiting for the right moment to strike? I started pulling back, my messages, to the group chat growing sparse, my unease a constant companion as I watched Ben's behavior in person, looking for signs of the darkness I'd seen online. But he seemed normal enough at school. Quiet, awkward, his intense stare the only hint of something off, a gaze that lingered too long that made me feel like prey under a hunter's watch. I told myself I was overreacting, that he was just a troubled kid, that I was letting my imagination run wild, but deep down, I knew better. Knew that the boy who sent those messages was capable of more, capable of harm, capable of something I couldn't yet name. The unease grew when I went Christmas shopping in town one Saturday alone, my arms full of bags as I wandered through the bustling plaza, the holiday lights a stark contrast to the chill I felt when I spotted Ben down the sea road, staring directly at me. I waved awkwardly, hoping to diffuse the tension, but he didn't wave back, just kept staring, his gaze unblinking, before casually walking into a side street, disappearing from view. I turned around a few minutes later, and there he was again, always at a distance, always watching. His presence a shadow that followed me through the crowd, a predator tracking his prey. I noticed Ben standing down the road, just sort of staring directly at me. I waved at him awkwardly, but he just kept staring before casually walking into a side street for the rest of the trip. Every time I turned around, Ben seemed to be there always. At a distance and always staring, the stalking a silent threat that left me angry, scared. My shopping cut short as I hurried home, my heart pounding with the realization that Ben was more than just a troubled kid. He was dangerous, and I was in his sights. The forest outing with Ben marked a turning point, his eerie behavior a clear sign of danger that forced me to distance myself, a decision that proved wise when his violence finally erupted. A few days after the stalking incident, during lunch, at school, Ben and another friend, Jack, convinced me and our friend Zach to join them in the forest behind the school, a wooded area where kids sometimes hung out to smoke or skip class. I was bored, restless, and despite my unease, I agreed. A decision I'd soon regret. Ben and another friend, Jack, convinced me and a third friend, Zach, to come with them into the forest behind her school. It was stupid, I know, but I was bored and decided to go. The choice a mix of teenage impulsiveness and a lingering hope that I'd misjudged Ben, that he was just a weird kid trying to fit in, not the threat I feared he might be. We ventured deeper into the woods, the trees closing in around us, the air cool and heavy with the scent of pine, the sunlight filtering through, the leaves in dappled patterns that should have been peaceful but felt oppressive, suffocating. Ben started acting strange almost immediately, his laughter sharp, manic as he repeated, "Closer, closer," his voice a chant that sent a chill down my spine. As we ventured deeper into the woods, Ben started acting strange, laughing and repeating, "Closer, closer," the words a haunting refrain, his eyes glinting with an excitement that felt wrong, dangerous, a predator leading us into a trap. Zach and I exchanged a glance, the same unease mirrored in his expression, and we agreed it was too creepy, that we needed to leave, our instincts screaming at us to get out before it was too late. Ben seemed pissed when we turned back, his face darkening as he and Jack kept going, refusing to follow us. When we asked why he wanted us to keep going, his response was chilling. "I wanted to set a fire and show you," he said, his tone casual, as if setting a fire in the middle of a forest with us there was a normal idea, a fun activity, not a dangerous act that could have trapped us, hurt us, or worse. Eventually, both Zach and I agreed that it was creepy and decided to head back. And Ben seemed pissed when he and Jack turned, and when we asked why they wanted us to keep going. Ben said he wanted to set a fire and show us, his words a confirmation of the danger I'd sensed, a sign that his darkness wasn't just in his messages, his stalking, but in his actions, his intentions, a threat I couldn't ignore any longer. I distanced myself after that, leaving the group chat, my fear outweighing any lingering loyalty to Ben, any hope that he was just misunderstood. I told Tom and Zach about the stalking, the messages, the forest, my voice trembling as I admitted how scared I'd been, how I couldn't shake the feeling that Ben was dangerous, that he was capable of more than we'd seen. They listened, their faces pale, but they didn't fully believe me. Not yet. Not until Ben's violence erupted in a way we couldn't ignore, a way that would leave us all shaken, a way that would prove my instincts had been right all along. Ben's attack on Tom was a brutal wake-up call, his expulsion a relief that came with lingering fear, as his continued messages revealed a darkness that refused to fade, a threat that haunted me. The attack happened a week after I'd left the group chat during lunch at school, a day that started like any other but ended in violence that would change everything. Ben had cornered Tom in the courtyard, pulling out a homemade blade, later identified as a razor from a pencil sharpener, and slashing at him, leaving a deep gash near Tom's wrist, blood staining the concrete as Tom screamed, the sound echoing through the school. Ben attacked Tom at school with a homemade blade, and I believe it was a razor from a pencil sharpener. Tom ended up with a wound near his wrist, and Ben was expelled from school, the incident a shock that rippled through our friend group, a confirmation of the danger I'd sensed, a violence I'd feared but hoped I was wrong about. Ben was expelled immediately, the school taking swift action, though no legal charges were filed, a decision that left us all uneasy, the lack of consequences a reminder that he was still out there, still a threat. I was re-added to the group chat by Jack a month later, a reluctant return that I regretted the moment I saw Ben's new messages, graphic photos of himself, self-harm in vivid detail, paired with rants about how he hated his family, blamed them for his misfortunes. His words a chilling mix of anger and despair that made my blood run cold. I was eventually read. While I was on break from the group, Ben attacked Tom at school with a homemade blade. I found that Ben had been sending graphic photos of himself, doing things to himself and ranting about how he hates his family, blaming them for his misfortunes. The message is a window into a mind unhinged, a darkness that hadn't faded with his expulsion, a darkness that felt like a prelude to something worse, something I feared might involve me. I blocked him after that, my hands trembling as I deleted the chat. My fear a living thing that followed me through the halls of school, through the streets of my town, a shadow I couldn't escape. I told Tom and Zach everything, the stalking, the forest, the messages. My voice steady despite the terror gripping me. My friends finally understanding the depth of my fear, their own unease, a mirror to mine as we grappled with the reality of what Ben had become. Tom, still healing from the attack, his wrist bandaged, his face pale, admitted he'd underestimated Ben, that he'd thought he was just a troubled kid, not a violent one, a mistake that had nearly cost him more than a scar. I couldn't shake. The memory of the forest, the way Ben had laughed, the way he'd wanted to set a fire, the way his eyes had glinted with something I now recognized as malice, as danger. I replayed the stalking in town, the way he'd watched me, the way he'd followed me, his presence a constant threat that I couldn't unsee, couldn't forget. I wondered what he'd planned in that forest, what he'd intended to do if we hadn't turned back, if Zach and I hadn't listened to our instincts, if we'd stayed just a little longer, a what-if that haunted me, a fear that kept me up at night, a fear that Ben was still out there, still watching, still waiting. Ben's expulsion didn't erase the fear he'd instilled in me, his darkness a lingering threat that reshaped my sense of safety, leaving me to navigate a world where danger could hide behind a familiar face. I'm more cautious now, my eyes scanning the halls at school, the streets of my town, always looking for Ben, for the glint of his stare, the shadow of his presence. I don't go to the forest anymore, the memory of that day too raw, the thought of what might have happened. A nightmare I can't escape. I've stopped hanging out with Jack, his refusal to see Ben's danger a betrayal I can't forgive, a reminder that some people will always look away, even when the threat is clear, even when it's stained with blood. Tom and Zach are closer. Now our shared fear a bond that strengthened us, a trio united by the knowledge of what Ben was capable of, what he might still be capable of. I often think about that time in town, the way he'd followed me, the way he'd watched me. His gaze a predator's focus, a silent promise of something I'd escaped but couldn't forget. I wonder about the forest, about what he'd planned, about the fire he'd wanted to set. Was it just a thrill, a prank, or something darker, something meant to trap us, to hurt us, to leave us as broken as the images he'd sent? I'll never know. And that uncertainty is its own kind of terror, a question that lingers in the back of my mind, a shadow that follows me through my days, a reminder that danger can wear a familiar face, can laugh with you, can call you friend. I'm genuinely worried about Ben, about what he'll do next, about the killer vibes I can't shake, the fear that he knows where I live, that he's not far away, waiting for a moment to strike. I'm genuinely worried he gives off killer vibes, but maybe I'm just being paranoid. And I often think about that time in the forest and in the town plaza anyways. Should I be concerned, or am I just overreacting? Sometimes I worry that Ben knows where I live and that he's not far away. The fear a constant companion, a weight I carry as I navigate my senior year, my friendships, my life. I've told my parents, my teachers, anyone who'll listen, but they can't do much. Not without proof, not without another act. A reality that leaves me feeling exposed, vulnerable, a prey animal in a world I thought I knew. Ben's darkness has changed me, made me more guarded, more aware. A teenager forced to grow up too fast to see the world for what it can be, dangerous, unpredictable, a place where a friend can become a threat, where a walk in the forest can become a nightmare, where survival means listening to the quiet voice that whispers of danger, even when it wears a familiar face.